Hello everyone and welcome to a new video. In this video we are going to be talking about the human rights violations inside the animal agriculture industry and how being a non-vegan actually contributes to a lot of human suffering as well. Now this video is directed at human rights activists who are not necessarily vegan or follow a plant-based diet. Before we get to it, a quick favor, please don't forget to subscribe and turn the notification bell so that you stay up to date with these videos. It's important to note from the beginning that we already have enough reasons to go vegan. Everything that I'm going to be sharing with you today are just extras. They are not there to make the argument stronger. The argument is already strong enough that we should stop animal exploitation immediately in respect to other animals. However, since human rights activists mostly care about humans, I thought it's important to make a video to underline the human suffering caused by the animal agriculture industry. This is not a new subject in any way. It actually has been around for at least 100 years. In 1906, Upton Sinclair wrote a book called The Jungle. It was a novel in which he talked about an Eastern European family who moved to the United States in order to have a better quality of life and how they ended up having it worse than you could ever imagine. The novel talked a lot about the animal agriculture industry, mainly slaughterhouses and meatpacking plants, the conditions in there and how it affects the lives of people who work there. If you are a human rights activist and you are watching this video, I'd like to remind you that when it comes to justice, we have to apply it to all beings. You know, as a human rights activist, you would never fight for the justice of a certain demographic while denying justice to another demographic. And the whole point of speciesism is that while you are fighting for justice, you don't put that exception when it comes to other animals. John Rawls, who was a very famous American political and moral philosopher, said that justice, if worthy of its name, should be blind. That means that justice should apply to everyone. And you shouldn't just be picking certain demographics or species or genders or races to apply it to. That being said, let's not make this introduction too long and let's get to all the points that I'm going to be talking about today. The American journalist Eric Schlosser talked about the meatpacking facilities in the US and how in the 1960s these facilities actually started leaving the cities where workers are largely unionized to more rural areas where unions aren't as strong. Once they were away, they opened new plants in rural areas far from union strongholds. They started recruiting immigrant workers, mainly from Mexico. They introduced a new labor division that eliminated the need of having skilled butchers and ruthlessly battled the unions. Before this, meatpacking jobs were considered dangerous and unpleasant, but they did provide a solid middle-class life. Now, by the 1990s, with the unions busted, meatpacking became one of the nation's lowest paid industrial jobs with one of the highest turnover rates. We have to keep in mind that one of the biggest issues in worker safety is worker voice, their ability to say something, to be able to say no to abusive conditions. Immigration status has a massive effect on this. Immigrants are afraid that if they speak up, they could get fired, and for undocumented workers, their fear is that they could get deported in retaliation for speaking up. Obviously, all of this plays a huge part when it comes to the payment of these workers. Now, I am aware that as an animal rights activist, I am talking about the rights of the people who are employed to kill the animals, but as I said, this video is going to be about human rights and it is directed at non-vegan human rights activists in order for them to see what they are causing. When it comes to payment, we have to keep in mind that if these workers aren't able to speak up about what's happening, or if they don't have unions that could help them speak up or defend their rights, they are really going to be abused. In fact, a paper in the National Academy of Social Research showed that in 16 states, average workers' compensation benefits leave injured workers below the poverty line of the state. Talking about injured workers, let's get to the second point, which is injuries. The overall rate of workplace injuries and illnesses per 100 workers in the industrial sector is 5.7, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the US. That number in the manufacturing sector is 8.1, and when it comes to the meatpacking industry, it's 20 per 100 workers. Now, the tasks that these workers have are very repetitive. In fact, there are some workers who have to do the same movement over 30,000 times per shift. Statistics from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration have shown that 1 out of every 7 poultry workers were injured on the job. That is more than double the average of all private industries. Poultry workers were also 14 times more likely to have injuries stemming from repetitive trauma, such as the claw hand or ganglionic cysts. Now, one article shared by the Human Rights Watch called Worker Safety in the Meat and Poultry Industry said that meatpacking plants had the highest rates of MSTs, 7 times the average incidence rate in manufacturing. Now, according to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, US meat workers are 3 times more likely to suffer from serious injuries than the average American worker, while beef and pork workers are 7 times more likely to suffer from repetitive strain injuries. Now here's where it gets interesting. The Government Accountability Office have found that many injuries could be significantly underreported for a variety of reasons. Number one, much of the labor actually works for third-party contractors, which means that their injuries isn't necessarily counted in meatpacking data. Number two, companies have an incentive to discourage workers from taking trips to the doctor, and instead they offer over-the-counter painkillers and ointments. Number three, vulnerable workers such as non-citizens or immigrants may fear for their livelihoods and feel pressured not to report the injuries. Now let's get to the next point, which is crime. This study, called Slaughterhouses and Increased Crime Rates, an empirical analysis of the spillover from the jungle into the surrounding community, compared crime rates between 1994 and 2002 in more than 500 towns that were undergoing rapid growth, where there were a large number of slaughterhouses or other comparative industries such as iron and steel forging or truck trailer manufacturing. The following factors were controlled for: young males, poverty, national and international migrants, unemployment, and population density. Now this study actually confirmed the existence of the Sinclair effect, the book that we actually talked about in the beginning of the video. Arrests for rape and violent crimes were actually significantly higher in slaughterhouse boom towns, with rape arrests reaching 166% higher in counties with large numbers of slaughterhouses. Now, as seen in this graph, they summarize the existing literature, both popular and academic, on the issue, and show that increases in arrests for violent crime, including rape and other sex offenses, were only observed in communities surrounding meatworks. They concluded that there is sufficient evidence to support the existence of the Sinclair effect, that the unique and violent nature of the work involved has a harmful effect on employees and in turn on society in general. This is literally the industry that you're supporting as a non-vegan. If you are a human rights activist watching this video, I want you to please pause it for a moment and ask yourself, are you comfortable contributing to this industry? Now that we have talked about the types and rates of the crime that increases in the community, let's also see in what other ways the community is affected. The perfect example is found in North Carolina. Over 500 residents in eastern North Carolina sued Smithfield Foods. They're seeking damages over the cesspools, or lagoons as the industry calls them, which are basically uncovered storage pools of waste. The lagoons of course disrupt their lives and devalue their properties. One couple alleges they were forced to close their family business, a restaurant, because the smell drove customers away. Another complainant says he and his wife are so embarrassed by the odor that they no longer have friends over. Some of them say that their children are bullied at school for how their clothes smell. Now, to outsiders, this could just look like neighbors fighting, but it's much more than that. It's a story of poverty and racial inequality. Now, when it comes to this area, almost a quarter of the population lives below the poverty line and is also disproportionately Black and Hispanic compared to the rest of the state. Here, pigs outnumber humans 32-1. Now, accompanying all these pigs is all the waste, as they produce 2 to 5 times more waste than humans. The nearly 2.3 million pigs raised in Dublin County produce twice as much waste as the entire city of New York. This is of course not at all an isolated incident. It is poor and rural communities that bear the effects of the industry. In fact, most of the cases brought to court against the industry are done so by Black Americans. A study released last year by UNCCH found that Black North Carolinians were 1.5 times as likely to live within 3 miles of an industrial hog operation as white residents. American Indians were twice as likely, and Hispanic residents were 1.39 times as likely to live near these faculties in North Carolina. The study's authors concluded that this spatial pattern is recognized as environmental racism. Now, how else does the industry target communities of color? The following article says that, but far from being a model of fairness in racial minority hiring, the high rate of Black and Hispanic workers are precisely because companies find it easiest, with high unemployment rates among those population groups, to impose working conditions most workers would refuse. What does that say to you about an industry? On top of this, researchers from the School of Public Health at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, said swine catfolds are disproportionately located in Black and brown communities and regions of poverty. Now, another amazing study that I was looking into, done by the Council on Black Health and what I think is pronounced as Rudd Center, is the increasing disparities in unhealthy food advertising targeted to Hispanic and Black youth. Now, I encourage every single one of you to go through this study. I'm going to be linking all the studies in the comment section below. This is really well prepared. They show how every single company was spending their advertising money and who they were targeting by race and percentage. And of course, they found a very nasty thing that the industry is doing, which is not new, but they actually target minorities, specifically Black and Hispanic youth. In their conclusion, they said, all of the companies in our analysis with the highest levels of targeted advertising also have publicized corporate responsibility initiatives to promote nutrition, health, and wellness. Companies have not indicated for whom these initiatives are intended, but it does not appear that their corporate investments in health and wellness extend to consumers of color. It is important to ask why. Companies that view advertising of nutritionally poor brands to multicultural consumers as a business opportunity should weigh that opportunity against the resulting cost to these communities. How does this affect the community when it comes to health? Let's see together. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention has actually this amazing graph. As you can see, the highest percentage is American Indian or American Native. That is followed by Black non-Hispanic, and Hispanic, obviously from men to women, it actually changes. Then we have Asian, and then we have white non-Hispanic. For those of you who don't know, eating animal products plays a major role in getting type 2 diabetes, and this is only further proven with all the research showing that this is what the industry is doing to these minority communities. In the UK, Public Health England has a very informative page when it comes to type 2 diabetes. The ethnicity and type 2 diabetes risk shows that the South Asian population living in the UK are up to 6 times more likely to develop type 2 diabetes than that of the white population. People of African and African Caribbean descent are 3 times more likely to have type 2 diabetes than the white population. Not only is type 2 diabetes highly linked to eating animal products, but following a whole foods plant-based vegan diet has also shown to reverse or prevent type 2 diabetes. Now, how does this affect the community? If we are all paying taxes, these taxes are being used for several things, between health and education and military expenses or whatever, but we would all want, especially as human rights activists, that our taxes help other humans. Well, unfortunately, the impact of the diseases created by the animal agriculture industry costs billions of dollars in taxpayer money. Now, in the United States alone, the CDC data shows that 1.5 million Americans suffer from heart attacks and strokes each year, which contributes $320 billion in healthcare costs and lost productivity. If we were to follow the only diet in the world that has proven to reverse, prevent, or cure heart disease, we could spend that money elsewhere. A new study done by the RTI projects that by 2035, cardiovascular diseases continue this way, they are going to cost the economy $1.1 trillion per year. Now, for those of you who are probably thinking, well, that's a lot of money, but also the animal agriculture industry contributes to the economy in a lot of ways. Well, the most recent study by the Proceedings of the National Academy of the Sciences showed that the US farms cost the economy more in health and environmental damage than they contribute to it. For 20 economic sectors, the study compares the cost of premature deaths from particulate air pollution to the value added to the economy. Farms produce worst, driven down by animal agriculture. The study didn't even include the health costs of consuming animal products. The number one cause remains meat and dairy, and when it comes to particulate pollution, the leader is poultry farming, which is chicken farms. Now let's talk about mental health. How does working in a slaughterhouse, killing hundreds if not thousands of animals every single day affect someone mentally? This particular study, called The Prevalence of Serious Psychological Distress Among Slaughterhouse Workers at a United States Beef Packing Plant, concluded that workers at a US industrial slaughterhouse experienced higher prevalence of serious psychological distress compared to United States population-wide estimates, but occupational risk factors for this outcome were not identified. Researchers of the study Slaughtering for a Living, which is a really powerful one, said seemingly they mostly feel forced to the slaughter work and confess an inability to escape the role, as they regard it as their sole competence and only means to provide for their families. Destructive behavior towards others spill over from the work to home environment. Such violence and participant experiences of social detachment and isolation intensifies negative effect and psychological defenses that occurred earlier in the adjustment process, exacerbating in turn the negative spillover and social consequences. So the study is literally saying that slaughterhouse workers feel like they do not have an alternative to doing this job, and this is the only thing they can do to provide for their families. How does it make you feel to pay for someone to do something that no one literally wants to do, and the only reason that they are there is because of their socioeconomic background? if you actually care about human rights, this should be a very important point for you. I would actually like to read a few confessions from this study. One worker said, "In my dream, I see the bleeding line, just the cattle hanging on the line, all whose heads are off. I get this picture often. It's not nice to dream about blood. You wake up wet with sweat." And finally, another worker says, "You rather lie than say where you work. You lie to them. You are ashamed where you work. My uncle told me you never say where you work. I was very ashamed working with blood." The next subject we're going to be talking about is rehabilitation and prison population. You might be thinking, what does this have to do with the animal agriculture industry? Well, this industry literally doesn't care about any being, whether that is human or non-human. Basically, what they like to do is to take prisoners after they're out and have them work there. And for this, they even make programs and get help from the government. In 2020, Corrections Canada wanted to establish prison dairy operations to produce infant formula for the Chinese market. Canadian prisoners will factory farm thousands of goats to produce milk for Fade International. So literally they want to take prisoners who probably have committed a crime and show them how to exploit other animals and separate them from their families. Don't get me wrong, this is not at all an attack on the prisoners or their backgrounds or what they've done, but how do you think that is going to help someone who is living in a prison? How do you think it affects them, and how do you think they start seeing weaker beings? Does that in any way make them think that they should help weaker beings? If you actually care about environmental justice, prisoner justice, social justice, you should be against this industry. You see, you can help prisoners by not exploiting them, making them exploit other beings. You can help them if you have them work at farms that are plant farms, as simple as that. Now, the subject of ethics or lack thereof making prisoners work is something completely different, but it doesn't change the fact that this is actually happening and we should be talking about it. Now, this is not only in Canada. In Australia, the Northern Territory government was actually sentencing prisoners to start working in a new slaughterhouse, saying that in their words, they will learn new valuable experiences and training. Valuable experience and training. They are slaughtering animals. What is so valuable about that? You're taking someone who is in prison and teaching them how to kill an innocent being. When it comes to the United States, I found the following by the Minnesota Department of Agriculture called Meat Processing for Inmates, Considerations for Creating a Butcher Training Program at the Northeastern Regional Correction Center. Within the Correction Center, they want to teach prisoners how to butcher animals. Just goes to show how messed up this industry is. Now let's get to the next topic, which is a bit more contemporary, and that is the coronavirus. Believe it or not, but slaughterhouses were actually a hotspot of the coronavirus in the US, mainly because Trump considered that it is essential business to continue killing animals, and therefore they should stay open and continue operating. Now, the conditions that they work in obviously made it become a hotspot for the virus, and that is why many workers die. An example is the refugee and your grandmother who was the 8th employee at the Colorado meat plant to die from the virus. They had moved there from Thailand as refugees to live a better life, and that's what they got in return. Now, some areas with slaughterhouses had up to 10 times more coronavirus cases than other areas. An example of this is Moore County, where we can find one of the nation's largest beef facilities that is owned by JBS, which is a huge company that profits from the murder of millions of animals and the destruction of the Amazon rainforest. And last but not least, I want to talk about refugees. I did mention one worker who was a refugee who passed away from the coronavirus, but let's talk about how this industry actually targets refugees. The industry relies so much on refugees that they were asking the Canadian government to allow asylum seekers to stay in Canada to work on the front lines of COVID-19. Literally no one wants to do the job, to the point that they're trying to ask the government to let asylum seekers stay because otherwise no one would do the job. The head of the industry's main trade association literally told the Wall Street Journal that he hopes that the government will take into consideration as how this would affect and would help them help refugees or anyone who wants to build a better life in their country to start that life and give them a chance. You literally don't care about the type of life these people are living. The only reason you need them there is because the conditions that you provide or the payment that you provide is not good enough for a Canadian to do it. In fact, the Canadian Meat Council in Ottawa was literally lobbying Justin Trudeau's government to implement changes to make it easier for low-skilled workers to come in Canada to work in slaughterhouses and meat packing facilities. They literally want to make changes that are pro-immigration and pro-refugees because no one wants to do that job. What does that say about someone who would pay for this industry? Ask yourself that question. The Maple Leaf Senior Foods Vice President literally said that they are ready to give jobs to Syrian refugees. They want to bring people who are literally in a war and who are seeing destruction and violence all the time, all the way to Canada because they care about them, to make them work somewhere where they will have to kill hundreds if not thousands of animals every single day. How psychotic can one industry get is the question you should ask yourself. That being said, I'm finally done. Keep in mind, I am not even done with the research. I could have gone forever. The amount of things that I have, it's impossible to put it in one video. Thank you so much for watching this video. I appreciate it. I know it's a long one and a heavy one. However, it is important to talk about, especially in this day and age where human rights is on social media all the time. We have to, as human rights activists, to see what is happening to humans in the animal agriculture industry. But as I said, please don't forget, this is not something to make the argument stronger when it comes to veganism. The argument itself is enough, and that is that animals should not suffer or be exploited in any way under any circumstances. If you'd like to support these videos, which of course take a lot of time to put together and shoot and edit, please check out my website. I really appreciate every single patron that I have that is supporting me in what I'm doing. Thank you again for the support. Please don't forget to leave a comment in the comment section below. Let me know if you have any other story or fact that you can share about this industry. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.